still got a few more people who will be drifting in from the hold-ups on the A35 and so on, but we'll try and make a start so that we can keep as close to time as we can. Okay, so why are we here today? The aim is to inform the voluntary and community sector representatives about the relevant details and impact of funding, and here we have a choice of words depending on which side of the fence you sit, funding cuts or funding savings on local communities and the voluntary community sector. In particular, we're going to focus on...
Generally, it's part of Dorset Community Action's role to organise networking events for the voluntary and community sector. So really it was part of that role, that standard aim that we have as an organisation. But obviously at these times it was important for us to address the real issues that are facing the voluntary and community organisations, and that's why we came up with the surviving the spending cuts title.
How do you think we're placed in Dorset for cuts?
I think it could be worse. We certainly know of colleague organisations in other counties who are having to face much harder decisions being made by their local authorities. So generally I think there's a commitment from the County Council to do their best for the voluntary and community sector. I think the hard thing is making sure that everyone does have a chance to comment and be involved in these difficult decisions that have to be made.
The fact that we have long bemoaned the fact that we have lower grant per head than almost any other local authority in Britain, of course means that a proportionate reduction in government grant affects us less direly than some other areas which are more reliant on government grant for their overall budget. But there are still significant reductions in Dorset, and there's a table there of the different sorts of grant from government which is being reduced for next year, which comes to a total grant loss to Dorset County Council of 18 million or 23%. Set against that is a new grant of £5 million to assist us in keeping the council tax as it is, without an increase this year, but that of course comes out as sort of neutral in what it does to our capacity to spend, because that grant is coming in, but an increase in council tax to match inflation isn't. I don't complain about that, I'm just trying to tell you dispassionately what the facts are. Now, on top of that £18 million grant loss, of course, any local authority in Britain at the moment is finding that there are budget pressures, so to stay in the same place from one year to the next costs more. We have a dramatically ageing population, we're having increasing expenditure demands, in particular on learning disability. We have inflation that's going up. That's not affecting wage costs because we're about to enter the second year of a wage freeze, third year for senior staff, second year for public service staff generally. Capital financing costs, landfill tax, increased costs there. There are other things, but those are the main ones. Thank you. So when we add the projected reduction in grant to the extent to which costs are rising, and so it costs us more to stay in the same place with the same level of service. The figures are that over a 3-year period, we have to take £55.5 million out of our revenue budget, and that's front-loaded, deliberately government policy. They want to make a hit on this in the early stages, so we make some dent into that deficit straight away, and we are having to take out of our revenue budget some £31 million in the year about to begin.
I think the timescales involved make it much harder. We heard this morning about how a lot of the cuts have to be front-loaded, and really we have to look to national government for those kind of decisions. But there's a real danger that we are having to make, or the county is having to make cuts quickly, which means their opportunity to hear about the positive solutions that voluntary organisations and communities can offer is really limited. And I think that's possibly the hardest thing that we're having to cope with at the moment, and just keeping up with all of the things that are happening really affects our ability to present strong campaigns, to send a strong message about what communities and voluntary organisations need, and therefore what people need.
The front loading is a big issue for us. It's a big issue to have all this money cut from us over 4 years. We're working in 3 years here, 55 million. But to actually have to deal in the first year with 31 million is a huge problem for us. I have, and others have, right across the nation, been trying to persuade, or have been trying to persuade, it's too late now, the Treasury through the DCLG to change that, or to make it easier for us to deal with it. We're not allowed to bridge our money across the board. That would require national legislation to change, so I'm afraid we are where we are. So our task as far as this group are concerned, really, within that big society, which I'm not sure it's a dirty phrase or not these days, but as long as somebody understands more or less what we're talking about, is trying to deal with our wider community and help with tasks further down the line at whatever level that happens to be. So how are we going to be able to secure, protect and promote the voluntary sector? So we have a list really here. Dorset Association of Parish and Town Councils, we all know, who organise our parish and towns across the way, what they're getting. Systems Advice Bureau, hugely important to us all, and needed more and more, it has to be said, particularly in difficult circumstances. Special project support, that's something we've always done. It actually brings in, it comes to the Chief Executive's office, it brings in a large amount of money for very little expenditure. If judgment is used right, that's something that we've had for a while and is hugely useful for Dorset. Support services for voluntary organisations is at £161,000, and Community Grant Fund, which is putting a large amount of money in an area to actually support the community in various different ways. Different way of doing it, centralising a lot of money so that we can make the judgments about how best that money can be spent. Existing engagement with volunteers.
It takes a long time to get into the roots of the community, to understand and support those communities so that they can have their voice heard. So that's definitely been affected. I think also the fact that support organisations like Dorset Community Action are also having to cope with changes, cope with reduced resources, also impacts on our ability to sustain that connection. Dorset is a big place with a lot of people with a lot of very different views, and it's not the case that you can present by presenting one community's view, you're presenting them all by any means. So it's always been a challenge to make sure that communities have an opportunity to be heard. But now, with the reduced resources and the timescales involved, yes, that has certainly got harder.
So how do you see what the outcome of the cuts that's proposed?
I think it's going to be a direct threat to people's standard of living, sooner or later, probably sooner more than later. And I'm not very positive about the outcome. I think we're going backwards rather than forwards. Back to Victorian society rather than to the great society. And I'm not very happy.
I see a problem in actually getting enough volunteers. The volunteers we have now are doing several different volunteer jobs and work to the limit. Where are we going to find more volunteers when there is such scepticism about volunteering? That's my worry. And also, I don't want more volunteers doing jobs that really need training, proper training.
Skills such as care workers need, either in a care home or in a day centre, are skills, and they should be paid properly for their job. They're looking after the most vulnerable in our society. Volunteers have a role to play, and charities, but they're the icing on the cake, they are not the cake. And that's why we pay our taxes. You know, if they don't actually tax the people who ran off with our money, who are the banks, we're left picking up the pieces while we fund them to do the same again. That's why I'm outraged at the cuts, and I am very fearful for my old age, having cared for my mother, Melvin's mother and 2 aunts. I've seen how care has changed in the last 15 years. What's on offer? Respite, care homes, hospital facilities, how they've all gone down. And I dread to think I'm fit and able to fight my corner now, but who's going to fight for me? I have a son who's not particularly well. Who's going to look after me? And we've paid our taxes all our lives, and that's what it's about. And the other thing is that we mustn't allow society to say, the youngsters today say, well, you're the baby boom years, you paid your taxes, but you bought all the properties, you did good out of this society, and we're not going to pay for your old age. That's right.
I think that a big society really is a description of what already happens in Dorset. There are certainly, there's certainly always more that communities can and want to do at times, and taking over public sector assets and buildings is certainly something that some communities have demonstrated they are keen to do. It definitely feels paradoxical that we never has there been more talk about communities and voluntary sector and big society at a time when that community of organisations and people is feeling challenged and threatened. Individuals are feeling challenged and threatened around their own lifestyle, their own sustainability. So to ask people to commit more at that time is very difficult. There's a fair amount of fear around what that's going to mean for individuals, people that people care for, people's relatives, people who already find it difficult to get the services they need. So yes, it's difficult to balance those two needs at this moment in time. I think there is enough evidence in Dorset Community Action's history, long history and very recent history that demonstrates what value there is in communities, and that support to communities can really bring that to the fore and make the most of it. So I think that actually there are a lot of people in Dorset who would acknowledge the value of the kind of things that Dorset Community Action does. It's always difficult to sustain any charitable activity. It's particularly difficult when you do something which is one step removed from direct services, when we're about supporting other people to get things done. And yes, clearly at the moment that's a harder challenge, but it won't. The services won't stop. We will certainly have less resources, and we will need to work harder to make the most of what we have and to find new opportunities.